The courthouse floor was cold under my shoes. That was the first thing I noticed when I stepped through the heavy oak doors of courtroom 7B on the second floor of the Fulton County Federal Courthouse on a Monday morning in October. Not the lights, though they were the kind of cold fluorescent white that makes every face look like it's been washed in winter. Not the smell, though the air carried that peculiar mixture of old paper, floor polish, and lukewarm coffee that every government building in America seems to share. No. The first thing I noticed was how cold the marble was, even through the soles of the black leather pumps my husband David had bought me for my 50th birthday, back when I still believed that the worst thing life could do to me had already been done. I was wrong about that. The clock above the bailiff's desk read 9:47. The judge would be coming in at 10. I walked down the center aisle with my chin lifted and my back straight, the way my mama taught me to walk into any room where white folks might be watching. Though in this courtroom, most of the folks watching looked like me. The judge was a black woman. The court reporter was a black woman. Even the bailiff, a tall man with graying temples and a kind face, was black. And yet I knew, with the kind of knowing that 60 years of being a black woman in Georgia teaches you, that skin color alone would not save me today. I took my seat at the plaintiff's table next to Eleanor Brooks, Ellie, my best friend of 30 years, my attorney, the woman who had stood beside me at David's funeral and held my hand so tight I thought she might break the bones. Ellie wore a navy blue suit, and her silver-streaked natural curls were pulled back into a low bun. She smelled like shea butter and black coffee. She reached over and squeezed my wrist without a word. Across the aisle sat my son, Terrence Mae Washington, 38 years old, Harvard Law School, class of 2012, my firstborn. The baby I had labored 18 hours to bring into this world on a snowy February night at Grady Memorial Hospital, the same hospital where I would later spend 35 years as an ICU nurse, holding the hands of strangers who were dying while my own son grew up learning to look at his mama like she was something to be managed. Terrence wore a Tom Ford suit, charcoal gray. His tie was the color of arterial blood. His hair was cut close and lined sharp. He looked like a man who had prepared for this moment in front of a mirror, the way he used to prepare for debate tournaments in high school, the way I had helped him prepare, quizzing him at the kitchen table while the pot roast simmered on the stove. He did not look at me. Next to him sat his wife Brianna, a pretty woman in her mid-30s with honey-colored skin and a weave that probably cost more than my first car. She was wearing sunglasses, inside a courtroom, in October. And next to her, murmuring something into the ear of their attorney, sat Harold Whitfield, Brianna's father, the man who owned Whitfield Development Corporation, the man whose company had signed a loan agreement for $847,000 against my home without my knowledge, the man who was smiling like we were all gathered for a business breakfast at the Capitol Grill. Their attorney was Jonathan Reeves. I had looked him up. 6'2", silver hair, 2 ex-wives, a house in Buckhead worth $4 million, and a reputation for making elderly witnesses cry on the stand. He had once made a 74-year-old woman apologize for forgetting her own granddaughter's birthday during a deposition. He was, in the politest possible language, a shark. He was not smiling. He was watching me the way a shark watches anything that swims into its water. Ellie leaned over and whispered, "You good, Hannah Mae?" I nodded. My hand rested on the worn brown leather purse in my lap. Inside that purse, tucked between my reading glasses and a travel-sized bottle of lavender hand cream, was a plain brown envelope. The envelope had been sealed with a small piece of tape on the back. My husband's handwriting was on the front. 2 words written in the careful block letters David always used when he wanted to make sure I could read it. For Hannah. My son, sitting 12 feet away in his expensive suit, had no idea that envelope existed. He had no idea what was inside it. He had no idea that every phone call he'd made, every document he'd signed with my forged name, every quiet dinner meeting with his father-in-law, all of it had been anticipated by a man who had been dead for 8 years. I touched the wedding ring I still wore on my left hand. Gold, slightly scratched, inscribed inside with HMW and DGW, forever as a promise. The bailiff stood. "All rise. The Honorable Patricia Holloway presiding." I rose, and for the first time in 6 months, I wasn't afraid anymore, because in my purse sat a single brown envelope, and my son had no idea it existed. Let me tell you who I am, because the lawyers in this courtroom are about to spend the next 2 days telling a story about a confused old black woman, and I want you to know the truth before the lies begin. My name is Hannah Mae Washington. I was born Hannah Mae Coleman on August the 14th, 1966, in a small brick house on Pio Nono Avenue in Macon, Georgia. My mama, Ruth, taught 3rd grade at the segregated elementary school until integration came, and then she taught 3rd grade at the integrated one, and she told me once, when I was 7 years old, that the only difference between the two schools was who was allowed to eat lunch in the teacher's lounge. My daddy, the Reverend Elijah Coleman, was the pastor of Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church for 41 years. He preached his last sermon on a Sunday morning in April of 2004, came home, ate a plate of fried chicken and collard greens my mama had made, sat down in his recliner, and went to be with the Lord. My mama said she didn't cry at his funeral because she knew she'd see him again. She cried later, alone, every Sunday morning for the next 11 years until she joined him. I grew up in a house that smelled like cornbread and furniture polish. Every Sunday morning, my mama made sweet potato pie, not for dessert after Sunday supper, but to take to church. It was her grandmother's recipe, written in shaky old handwriting on a yellow index card that had butter stains and cinnamon smudges from 60 years of use. That card sits in my recipe box right now, in the kitchen of the house on Cascade Road where I have lived for the last 27 years. I have made that pie every Sunday of my adult life. I made one the morning of the trial, at 5:30 in the morning before the sun came up. I will tell you about that pie later. In 1984, I went to Spelman College on a partial scholarship and a prayer. I met a skinny boy from Morehouse named David Washington at a library study session my freshman year. He had a gap between his 2 front teeth and a laugh that made strangers turn around in restaurants. He was going to be a doctor. I was going to be a nurse. On our second date, he walked me back to my dorm and quoted Langston Hughes under a street lamp, and I knew, the way some women know these things, that I was going to marry him. We married in 1988 at Mount Zion, with my daddy officiating and my mama crying in the front pew. David went on to Morehouse School of Medicine. I went on to the nursing program at Emory. By 1991, we had our first baby, Terrence Allen Washington, named after David's grandfather, a sharecropper's son who taught himself to read by candlelight. By 1994, we had our daughter, Simone Elise. We bought the house on Cascade Road in 1998, a 3-bedroom brick ranch with a magnolia tree in the front yard, and David stood in the driveway that first day and said, "Hannah, this is where we raise them up. This is where we bury our dreams and watch them grow." He was a romantic, my David, a doctor by profession, but a poet by spirit. I worked 35 years at Grady Memorial Hospital in the intensive care unit, nights mostly. I held the hands of 417 people while they died. I know because I kept a little notebook, 1 line for each one, not their names, just a small thing I remembered about them. The man who whispered his wife's name 3 times and then smiled. The young girl who asked me if I thought God would recognize her when she got there. The old white man who squeezed my hand and said, "Thank you, sister," which he had probably never called a black woman in his life until that night. I am telling you all of this because in about 10 minutes, Jonathan Reeves is going to stand up in front of 12 jurors and tell them I am a confused, feeble, easily manipulated old woman who doesn't understand finances or legal documents or the modern world. And I want you, whoever is reading this, whoever is listening, to know the kind of woman I actually am before the lies begin. I am the woman who held 417 strangers while they left this world. I think I can handle a courtroom. But to understand why I am sitting here on this cold marble morning, you have to understand my son. And to understand my son, you have to understand the boy he used to be. Terrence was a small child, smaller than the other boys. Dark-skinned, too, the color of coffee beans like my daddy, in a world that even now, even in 2025, still teaches black children that lighter is better. He came home from 1st grade one afternoon in the spring of 1997, with his lips split open and his little blue backpack torn at the strap. Some other boys at Cascade Elementary had held him down on the playground and rubbed dirt into his face and told him he was too black to be at their school. He was 6 years old. I sat him down at the kitchen table. I cleaned his lip with hydrogen peroxide and a cotton ball. I held his face between my hands and I said, "Terrence, baby, listen to Mama. Your skin is the color of rich earth, and everything that grows, grows from earth like yours. Those boys are growing from you, even when they don't know it. You hear me?" He nodded, and then he cried. And I cried too. That was my boy. When he got to high school at Benjamin Mays, he won the regional debate championship 3 years running. When he got into Morehouse, I took double shifts at Grady for 4 years straight to make sure he didn't graduate with any student loans. When he got into Harvard Law School, David and I sold the 1994 Buick that David had been driving since residency so that we could cover his first semester tuition. David drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic after that. He used to pat the dashboard when he got in and say, "Old Faithful gonna outlive us all." For a long time, my boy called me every Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock sharp. He would tell me about his week, the cases he was working on at his law firm in Midtown Atlanta, the colleagues he was having lunch with, the restaurants he was trying. He would ask me about church, about my knee, about whether I was remembering to take my blood pressure medication. He was, in those years, a good son. And then, in the spring of 2020, he married Brianna Whitfield. I am not going to tell you that Brianna was a bad person. I don't know if she is or if she isn't. That's between her and her God. What I can tell you is that Brianna grew up in Buckhead in a house with 7 bedrooms and a swimming pool, and her mother had never made a sweet potato pie in her life. And the first time Brianna came to Sunday dinner at my house on Cascade Road, she looked at my living room, at the wood paneling, at the framed photograph of Dr. King on the wall, at my daddy's old leather Bible on the coffee table, and she smiled the kind of smile people smile at museum exhibits. After the wedding, the Sunday phone calls got shorter. Then they came every other week, then once a month. By the end of 2023, Terrence would call me on the first of the month, speak for 11 minutes, and hang up. I know it was 11 minutes because I started timing it, the way you start counting small things when you feel someone slipping away from you, and there's nothing you can grab hold of. Christmas of 2024, he didn't come home. He sent a store-bought card, one of those pre-printed ones that said "Season's Greetings from the Washingtons," and a $500 Visa gift card, the kind you can buy at the grocery checkout next to the batteries. I put the card in a drawer. I never spent the money. I cried that Christmas morning sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a slice of sweet potato pie, and I talked out loud to David like I sometimes still do when the house gets too quiet. I said, "David, I don't know who that boy is anymore." David didn't answer, of course. He had been dead 6 years by then. But, and I did not know this at the time, he had already answered. He had answered 8 years before, on a Tuesday afternoon in June of 2017, in a conference room in downtown Atlanta with a notary public and 2 witnesses and a tape recorder running. I just hadn't found the envelope yet. I found out about the loan on a Thursday morning in March of 2025. It was a beautiful day, I remember. The azaleas were starting to come in along the front walk, and I had the windows open to let in the first real spring air of the year. I was standing at the kitchen sink washing a coffee cup when the mail came through the slot and hit the hallway floor with a soft slap. I picked it up. Electric bill, grocery store coupons, a solicitation from my alma mater, and a thick cream-colored envelope from Wells Fargo Home Mortgage. I opened it. I read the first line. I read it again. I sat down on the bottom step of the staircase because my legs had stopped working. "Dear Mrs. Washington, this is a reminder that your monthly mortgage payment in the amount of $4,218 is due on April 1st, 2025. There was no mortgage on my house. David and I had paid it off in 2015. I remembered the day. David had brought home a bottle of sparkling grape juice because he didn't drink alcohol, and we had toasted in the kitchen, and he had said, 'Baby, this house is ours now, free and clear. Nobody can take it from us.' I drove to the Wells Fargo branch on Cascade Road that same afternoon in my 10-year-old Honda Civic. A young woman named Destiny pulled up my account on her computer. She looked at the screen. She looked at me. She looked at the screen again. She said, "Mrs. Washington, you refinanced your home on November 14th of last year. You took out a loan for $847,000. I said, "Baby, I did no such thing." She turned her monitor around so I could see it. There was a PDF of the signing packet, 47 pages. My name, Hannah Mae Washington, signed on every single page in a handwriting that looked almost exactly like mine. Almost. The H was a little too tall. The W looped the wrong way at the end. But if you didn't know my signature the way I know my signature, you might never catch it. I said, "Destiny, can you tell me the date again?" She said, "November 14th, 2024, 11:30 in the morning. Here at this branch, actually. On November 14th of 2024 at 11:30 in the morning, I was in Chicago. I was sitting in the waiting room of Northwestern Memorial Hospital, waiting for my daughter Simone to finish giving birth to her first child, my granddaughter, Ava Ruth, named for my mama. I have the plane tickets. I have the hospital photographs. I have the receipt from the cab ride. I was 900 miles away from that Wells Fargo branch. I drove home in a daze. I sat at my kitchen table and I called my son. He picked up on the fourth ring. I could hear voices in the background, restaurant voices, the clink of silverware. He said, "Hey, Mama, can I call you back? I'm having lunch." I said, "Terrence, did you take a loan out on my house?" The pause was about 3 seconds long. 3 seconds is a long time on the phone. 3 seconds is long enough to know that your child is about to lie to you. He said, "Mama, what are you talking about?" I said, "Baby, I'm looking at the paperwork right now. $847,000, dated November 14th. Somebody forged my name on it." Another pause. Then quietly, "Mama, listen. It's just paperwork. I can explain. I'm going to take care of it. You're going to get it all back. Just trust me, okay? Don't talk to anybody about this. I'll come by this weekend and I'll explain everything." He did not come by that weekend. What came by instead was a certified letter on Tuesday morning. The letter was from a law firm in Midtown Atlanta, Pemberton, Reeves and Associates. It informed me that my son Terrence Allen Washington had filed a petition in Fulton County Probate Court seeking to be appointed as my legal guardian on the grounds that I was, in the language of the petition, suffering from moderate to severe cognitive decline consistent with early-stage dementia, rendering her incapable of managing her own financial and medical affairs. I sat at the kitchen table and I read that letter 3 times. And then I did something I had not done in a very long time. I went upstairs to the bedroom David and I had shared for 27 years. I opened the bottom drawer of his old oak dresser, the one I had never been able to bring myself to empty. I pulled out his folded sweaters and his reading glasses case and the little cedar box where he kept his cufflinks. And at the very bottom of the drawer, tucked underneath a stack of old medical journals, was a plain brown envelope I had never seen before. My hands shook as I picked it up. On the front, in David's careful block handwriting, were 2 words, "For Hannah." I carried it downstairs. I sat at the kitchen table. I held it for a long time before I could bring myself to open it. Inside was a single handwritten letter, folded in thirds. The date at the top was June 20th, 2017, 8 years ago, a year before David got sick. The letter read, "My Hannah, if you are reading this, then the day I hoped would never come has come. Call Ellie Brooks. Tell her about the Jefferson file. She will know what to do. I am sorry, baby. I saw it coming and I prayed I was wrong. I have always loved you. I will always love you. Do what needs to be done. Our people are counting on you, even the ones who don't know your name. David." I read that letter 4 times. Then I put it down on the kitchen table. Then I sat there in the silence of my empty house and I cried the way I had not cried since the morning I watched them close the lid on David's casket. When I was finished crying, I wiped my face with a dish towel. I picked up the phone. I dialed a number I had known by heart for 30 years. Ellie picked up on the second ring. I said, "Ellie, it's Hannah. David left me a letter. He said to ask you about the Jefferson file." The line went quiet for a long moment. And then Ellie, my oldest friend, the woman who had been the maid of honor at my wedding, who had held my hand at David's funeral, who had never in 3 decades let me catch her off guard, Ellie said, in a voice I had never heard her use before, "Oh, Hannah. Oh, sweet sister, your husband has been waiting 8 years for you to make this call." Ellie Brooks's law office was on the 14th floor of the Equitable Building downtown, with a corner window that looked out over Centennial Olympic Park. I had been to that office exactly twice before in my life. Once in 2010 to update my will after my mother died, and once in 2018 to help Ellie close out David's estate. Both times I had come in through the lobby feeling small. Both times I had left feeling like Ellie had made me bigger. This time I walked through those big glass doors on a Friday morning in April, 3 weeks after I'd found the envelope, and the security guard at the front desk, a young black man with a gold cross around his neck, looked up at me and said, "Mrs. Washington, Miss Brooks is expecting you. Go on up, ma'am." I rode the elevator up alone. I held my purse in front of me with both hands. Ellie was waiting for me at the reception desk on the 14th floor. She was wearing a cream-colored pantsuit and her readers on a chain around her neck. And the minute the elevator doors opened, she came across the marble floor and pulled me into the kind of hug that only old friends can give you. The kind that says, I know, I know, I know, without a single word being spoken. She walked me back to her office. She closed the door. She sat me down in a leather chair across from her desk. She poured me a cup of coffee from a silver thermos, black, no sugar, the way I'd been drinking it since 1989. And then she sat down across from me and folded her hands on top of a manila folder that was already waiting on her desk. The folder was about 2 inches thick. She said, Hannah Mae, before I say a word, I want you to know 2 things. The first thing is that your husband was the finest man I ever knew, and he loved you with his whole soul. The second thing is that what I'm about to tell you is going to change how you see the last 10 years of your marriage. And I need you to know going in that nothing David did was done to keep secrets from you. He did it to protect you. Do you understand me? I nodded. My mouth had gone dry. She opened the folder. In the spring of 2017, Ellie said, David came to see me in this office. He sat right where you're sitting now. He told me that he had been diagnosed with stage 1 pancreatic cancer and that his oncologist had given him somewhere between 2 and 10 years. He told me that he hadn't told you yet because he wanted to have a plan in place before he did. That was David. Always had to have a plan. I could feel the tears coming. I pushed them back down. There would be time for crying later. David had been watching something in your neighborhoods, Hannah. Sweet Auburn, Cascade Heights, Summerhill. He'd been watching white developers come in and start buying up properties from elderly black folks at 50 cents on the dollar. He'd been watching speculators flip houses that had been in black families for 4 generations. He'd been watching his own son. My head came up at that. David didn't tell me the whole story about Terrence. He said some of it was just a father's bad feeling. But he told me enough. He told me that he'd overheard Terrence at a family dinner in 2016, laughing about how easy it was going to be to take advantage of the sentimental attachment. That's a direct quote, Hannah. I wrote it down. The sentimental attachment that older black homeowners had to their houses. David came home from that dinner and sat in his car in the driveway for 45 minutes before he could come inside. Ellie reached across the desk and took my hand. He built something, Hannah. He built something quiet, and he built it careful, and he built it legal. He and Dr. Samuel Jefferson, you remember Samuel from Morehouse, David's roommate, the two of them partnered up and they started something called the Washington Legacy Trust. It's a community land trust. It's registered as a 501c3. It buys up at-risk properties in historically black neighborhoods in Atlanta, stabilizes them, and keeps them in the community. David and Samuel funded it with their own money at first. Then other black professionals started coming in. Doctors, dentists, 2 judges I can't name, a couple of athletes. The trust now holds a portfolio of about 240 properties across 4 neighborhoods. She paused. She looked at me very carefully. Hannah, the trust is currently valued at approximately $42 million, and since David's death, you are the sole surviving beneficiary and the designated chair of the board. I did not say anything for a long time. I looked down at my coffee cup. I looked out the window at the park. A mother was pushing a stroller along one of the paths. 2 children were running ahead of her, their arms stretched out like airplane wings. I said $42 million. Ellie said, $42 million? I said, Ellie, David never had that kind of money. We lived in a 3-bedroom house. We drove used cars. He packed his lunch in a brown paper bag every day he worked at the hospital. Ellie smiled then, a small, tired smile. Baby, that was him. David didn't spend money on himself because he was spending it on this. He had investors. He had partners. He raised about $8 million in the first 2 years from other black professionals in Atlanta who believed in what he was doing. The rest came from smart real estate acquisitions, buying undervalued property, holding it, letting it appreciate. David had a gift for it, Hannah. He really did. I watched him do it. I put the coffee cup down on Ellie's desk because my hand had started shaking. Why didn't he tell me, Ellie? Ellie's eyes were wet. Because he knew what was coming, baby. He knew he was going to die. And he knew that the minute he was gone, there would be people circling. He told me, I remember exactly where I was sitting, right there where you are. He told me, Ellie, if Hannah doesn't know about this money, nobody can trick her into signing it away. If she doesn't know about it, nobody can manipulate her into giving it up. The only way she finds out about the Legacy Trust is if somebody makes a move on her. And if somebody makes a move on her, then it's time for the trust to fight back. I closed my eyes. I could see him. I could see my David sitting in this same office, making a plan to protect me from things I didn't even know existed yet. Ellie said, "Hannah, Mr. Reeves," that's Terrence's attorney, "Mr. Reeves called my office yesterday afternoon." My eyes opened. He wanted to settle. He offered to drop the guardianship petition if you would sign over the title to your house and accept $200,000 for, in his words, a comfortable retirement in a managed care community. He also wanted you to sign a non-disclosure agreement. I sat up a little straighter in the chair. "Ellie," I said, "my husband did not build a $42 million community trust so I could sell my house for $200,000 in a signed piece of paper." Ellie smiled. It was the first real smile I had seen on her face in weeks. "That's exactly what I told him," she said. "The weeks leading up to the trial were the hardest weeks of my life since David died. My daughter Simone flew down from Chicago on the first weekend of May. She left Ava Ruth with her husband and came alone, carrying a single overnight bag and a face full of worry. I picked her up at Hartsfield-Jackson on a Saturday afternoon. She hugged me in the cell phone parking lot and cried into my shoulder. When we got back to the house on Cascade Road, Simone sat down at the kitchen table, and I poured us both sweet tea, and I told her everything. The loan, the petition, the envelope, the letter, the legacy trust. $42 million. All of it. She listened. She didn't say anything at first. Then she looked up at me with her father's eyes. Simone has David's eyes. She always has. And she said quietly, "Mama, maybe Terrence didn't mean it the way it looks. He's a lawyer. Maybe there's an explanation. Maybe he was trying to help and it got out of hand." I took a sip of tea. I put the glass down. I got up from the table. I walked into the living room. I went to the bookshelf where David's Bible sits next to a framed photograph of our wedding day. I picked up the brown envelope, which I had been keeping inside the Bible ever since the day I found it. I brought it back to the kitchen. I put it in Simone's hand. "Read it, baby," I said. "Read your daddy's letter, and then you tell me what you think." She read it. She read it twice. And then my 32-year-old daughter put her head down on my kitchen table and cried like she hadn't cried since the day we buried her father. She cried for about 10 minutes. I didn't try to stop her. Some tears need to fall all the way down before the person crying can stand up again. When she was done, she sat up and she wiped her face with a paper napkin and she said, "Mama, what do you need me to do?" I said, "I need you to be my daughter. That's all." She stayed for 3 days. She came to church with me on Sunday, and we sat in the third pew on the left where my mama and daddy used to sit. The choir sang Blessed Assurance, and Simone held my hand through the whole song. Sister Patrice came up to us after service and patted Simone's cheek and said, "Child, you tell your mama she's got this whole church praying for her, every single one of us." Simone nodded. She couldn't speak. On Monday night at 2:14 in the morning, the phone rang. I was awake. I had been awake for most of the night. I had gotten up around midnight and come downstairs to sit in David's old reading chair in the living room, the one where he used to sit on Saturday mornings with a newspaper and a cup of coffee. I had been sitting there with the lights off, just thinking, when the phone rang. I picked it up on the second ring. "Mrs. Washington?" The voice on the other end was a woman's voice, older, warm, familiar the way you remember a song you haven't heard in 20 years. This is she. "Mrs. Washington, my name is Rosalind Jefferson. I was married to Dr. Samuel Jefferson. I knew your husband for 41 years. I sat up in the chair. "Rosalind," I said, "I remember you. Samuel came to our Christmas dinner in 2001. You brought a pecan pie." She laughed softly. "That's right, ma'am. Lord, you got a memory. Mrs. Jefferson, it is 2:00 in the morning." "I know it is, Mrs. Washington, I know it, and I apologize for the hour, but I've been waiting 8 years to make this phone call, and Miss Brooks called me yesterday afternoon and said the time has come, and I didn't want to wait until morning. I didn't want to give myself one more night of thinking about it." I said, "You knew about the trust?" "Yes, ma'am, I knew. My Samuel told me everything before he passed in 2021, and he made me promise him that when your day came, and he said it would come, Mrs. Washington, just like David said. He made me promise that I would stand by you. Whatever you needed. Whenever you needed it." I was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Jefferson, would you be willing to testify? Mrs. Washington, I have been waiting to testify. You just tell me when and where, and I will be there with my Bible in one hand and the truth in the other. I hung up the phone. I sat in David's chair in the dark for a long time. Outside the window, the magnolia tree in the front yard swayed a little in a soft May breeze. I thought about Samuel Jefferson, standing next to David at our wedding reception in 1988, both of them in rented tuxedos, laughing at some joke I couldn't hear. I thought about how the dead keep working for us, even when we can't see them. 3 days before the trial, Terrence showed up at my front door. It was a Wednesday evening. I was in the kitchen making dinner, just a small supper, some pan-fried catfish and rice, and I heard a car pull into the driveway. I looked through the front window, and I saw his black Mercedes. I saw him sitting in the driver's seat for almost 2 full minutes before he got out. He had lost weight. That was the first thing I noticed when I opened the door. His suit, a different one, navy this time, hung on him a little looser than I remembered. His face was drawn. The skin under his eyes looked bruised. "Mama," he said. I stepped back and let him in. I did not say anything. I walked back into the kitchen and I kept cooking. He followed me. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen like he was afraid to cross the threshold. "Mama, can I sit?" "It's your daddy's house, too," I said. "You sit wherever you want." He sat at the kitchen table. The same table where I had clipped coupons for his first-grade school supplies. The same table where I had quizzed him on SAT vocabulary. The same table where I had read my husband's letter from the grave 3 weeks earlier. "Mama," he said, "I need you to drop the lawsuit." I didn't turn around. I kept flipping the catfish in the pan. "Mama, please, you don't understand what you're doing. This is going to ruin me. It's going to ruin Brianna. It's going to... Mama, what are people at church going to say? What are they going to say about our family?" I turned the stove off. I turned around. I leaned back against the counter and I looked at my son for the first time since he'd come through the door. "Terrence Allen, do you remember when you were 6 years old and some boys at Cascade Elementary held you down and rubbed dirt in your face?" He blinked at me. "Mama, do you remember what I told you that afternoon at this table?" "Mama, what does that have to do with—" "I told you that your skin was the color of rich earth. I told you that everything that grows from earth like yours. Do you remember that?" "I remember. Your daddy and I raised you to know where you came from. We raised you to remember the people who come behind you. Your great-grandfather taught himself to read by candlelight, Terrence. He picked cotton in Terrell County, Georgia, so that his grandson could go to Harvard Law School. And you took that education, and you used it to forge your own mother's signature so you could displace 300 black families from their homes." He opened his mouth. He closed it. "Son," I said, "you forgot who raised you, but the court is not going to forget who I am." He sat at my kitchen table with his head in his hands for a long time. I did not go to him. I did not put my hand on his shoulder. There is a kind of comfort a mother can give her child, and there is a kind of comfort a mother must not give her child. And knowing the difference between the two is one of the hardest things in this life. After a while, he stood up. He walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the knob. "Mama," he said without turning around, "I never meant for it to go this far." "Baby," I said, "you never stopped it either." He left. I heard the Mercedes pull out of the driveway. I sat down at the kitchen table and I ate my supper alone. On Saturday, I went to the beauty shop and got my hair pressed. Miss Eugenia, who had been doing my hair for 22 years, did not ask me any questions. She just kissed my forehead when I paid her and said, "I've been praying, Hannah Mae. The whole shop been praying." On Sunday morning, I went to church and I sat in my usual pew. The pastor, Reverend Lewis Bell, preached on Psalm 27. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" He did not look at me while he was preaching. He did not need to. Every person in that sanctuary knew what Monday was going to be. Sister Patrice sat down next to me during the altar call and took my hand and held it so tight I could feel the pulse in her thumb. On Sunday night, I laid out the suit David had bought me for my 50th birthday. Gray wool, a cream-colored blouse, my mother's pearl necklace, the black pumps. I laid everything out on the guest room bed and I stood there looking at it for a long time, like a soldier looking at her uniform the night before a battle. Then I went into the kitchen and I made a sweet potato pie. I got up at 5:30 on Monday morning. I don't know why I made the pie. I don't know that I could explain it to anybody who didn't grow up the way I grew up. My mama used to say that a black woman cooks when she doesn't know what else to do, that the act of feeding something, even just dough and sweet potatoes and brown sugar, is a way of saying to the universe, I am still here. I am still building. I am still a maker of things. I peeled the sweet potatoes. I boiled them. I mashed them with butter and brown sugar and a little bit of nutmeg, the way my great-grandmother had done it on a wood-burning stove in Macon, Georgia, in 1912. I rolled out the crust. I poured the filling in. I put the pie in the oven at 350 degrees. While the pie was baking, I got dressed. I put on the gray wool suit. I fastened my mother's pearls around my neck. I slid the wedding ring David had given me, the one I have worn every single day for 37 years, onto my left hand. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, and I put on a little bit of lipstick, a soft rose color I had been wearing since 1992. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked tired. I looked older than I wanted to look. But I also looked like my mama. And my mama looked like her mama. And somewhere in that line of women going all the way back to a plantation in South Carolina before the Civil War, there was a woman who had survived things I could not even imagine. And she had survived so that I could stand in this bathroom in this house in Atlanta, Georgia, in October of 2025, and look at myself in the mirror and go to court. I took the pie out of the oven at 6:45. I set it on the counter to cool. I poured myself a cup of coffee. I sat at the kitchen table and I prayed out loud, the way my daddy used to pray at this same table on Sunday mornings when I was a little girl. I said, Lord, I do not know how this day is going to end. I do not know if my son is going to look at me in that courtroom today. I do not know if the truth is going to be enough. But I know you have walked with me this far, and I am asking you to walk with me a little further. In the name of your Son. Amen. I got in the Honda Civic at 8 o'clock. I drove down Cascade Road, past the houses where I had known every family for 27 years. I drove past Ebenezer Baptist Church, where Dr. King had preached. I drove past the old Auburn Avenue where my daddy used to take me as a little girl to buy penny candy at a store run by a man named Mr. Pascal. I drove into downtown Atlanta, and I parked in the courthouse garage, and I took the elevator up to the second floor. Ellie was waiting for me outside courtroom 7B. She was wearing a navy suit. Her hair was freshly done. She looked at that moment like the fiercest woman I had ever seen in my life. She took my hands. Ready, sister? I thought about David. I thought about my mama. I thought about my great-grandmother, whoever she was, whose name I did not even know. I thought about 417 strangers I had held while they died. Ellie, I said, I've been ready for 8 years. I just didn't know it. Jonathan Reeves stood up at 10:15 that morning and began to tell the 12 jurors a story about a confused old black woman. He was good. I will give him that. He stood in front of that jury box with his hands clasped behind his back, and he spoke in a voice that was warm and slow and sad, like a man delivering bad news to people he cared about. He described me as a devoted wife who lost her husband too soon and never quite recovered. He described me as a loving mother who has come to rely on her son's guidance in her later years. He described me as a woman of a generation that did not grow up with modern financial instruments and cannot reasonably be expected to understand the complexity of today's real estate transactions. Every third sentence he called me, "this sweet lady." I sat at the plaintiff's table and I kept my face still. I had learned how to keep my face still over 35 years of telling families that their people were not going to make it. A still face is a skill. It is not the same thing as not feeling. It is the opposite. It is the discipline of feeling everything and letting none of it show. Ellie passed me a note. It said, "He's overselling it. Watch the juror in seat 3. I looked. The juror in seat 3 was a black woman in her late 40s, wearing a burgundy blazer and reading glasses. She had stopped taking notes about 2 minutes into Reeves's opening statement. She was just watching him, with her head tilted slightly to one side, the way a woman watches a man she already does not believe. After Reeves finished his opening, the judge called the first witness for the defense. His name was Dr. Raymond Sinclair. He was a neurologist, Reeves said. He had evaluated me in February of 2025. I had never met Dr. Raymond Sinclair in my life. He took the stand. He was a tall white man with thinning hair and a pressed blue shirt. He had a stack of papers in front of him. He testified under Reeves's careful questioning that he had conducted a comprehensive neurological evaluation of me in February of this year and had concluded that I was suffering from mild to moderate cognitive impairment consistent with early-stage dementia. He used a lot of long words. He said executive function 7 times. He said anomic aphasia. He said diminished capacity for complex decision-making. When Reeves sat down, Ellie stood up. She walked to the podium slowly. She smiled at Dr. Sinclair. She said, "Good morning, Doctor." "Good morning. Doctor, you testified that you conducted a comprehensive neurological evaluation of Mrs. Washington in February. Is that correct?" "Yes." "Can you tell the court the 5 standard clinical assessments you performed?" There was a silence, about 3 seconds long, the kind of silence a lawyer knows how to use. Dr. Sinclair said, "Well, I performed the mini-mental state examination and the Montreal Cognitive Assessment and the clock drawing test." "That's 3, Doctor. You testified there were 5. I would have to consult my notes." "Please do." He shuffled the papers. The paper shuffling went on for about 45 seconds. 45 seconds is a very long time in a quiet courtroom. Ellie let him shuffle. Then Ellie said, "Doctor, while you're looking, I'd like to ask the court to admit into evidence Defense Exhibit 12. This is a disciplinary order from the Florida Medical Board, dated September of 2019, suspending Dr. Sinclair's medical license for a period of 18 months for, and I am quoting directly, Your Honor, providing false expert testimony for financial consideration in 3 civil proceedings." The courtroom got very quiet. Judge Holloway looked at Dr. Sinclair over the top of her glasses. "Is the witness aware of this disciplinary order?" Dr. Sinclair said very quietly, "Yes, Your Honor." "Did you disclose this to counsel before offering testimony today?" "No, Your Honor." Judge Holloway made a note. The note was short. It looked, from where I was sitting, like a very bad note for the defense. Ellie sat down. She did not need to ask another question. The second witness for the defense was Brianna. She walked to the stand in a pale pink dress and the kind of heels that click on a marble floor in a way that tells everybody in the room how much they cost. She had taken off her sunglasses. Her eyes were rimmed red, like she had been crying, and I wondered if the crying was real or if it was the kind of crying you practice in front of a mirror on a Sunday night before a Monday morning trial. Reeves walked her through her testimony gently. Brianna testified that I often forgot the names of my own grandchildren, which would have been an interesting accusation, considering I only have one grandchild, who was 5 months old at the time, and whose name I have never once forgotten. She testified that she had come to my house in November of 2024 and found me wandering in the kitchen, confused about what I was preparing. She testified that she and Terrence had grown increasingly concerned about my ability to manage my affairs. I watched my daughter-in-law lie about me under oath, and I did not blink. When Ellie stood up to cross-examine her, she walked over to the podium, set down a single sheet of paper, and looked at Brianna for a long moment. Then Ellie said, "Mrs. Washington, when was the last time you shared a Sunday meal with your mother-in-law?" Brianna blinked. I'm sorry, what? When was the last time you sat down and ate a Sunday meal with Mae Washington? We've had dinners together. When, Mrs. Washington? Give me a date. I couldn't tell you the exact. Was it this year? No. Was it last year? I don't recall. Was it the year before that? Brianna looked at Reeves. Reeves looked at the ceiling. "Mrs. Washington," Ellie said, "I'm going to ask you one more time. When was the last time you sat down at Mae Washington's kitchen table and shared a meal with her? Any day of the week. It doesn't have to be Sunday." Brianna's voice got very small. "Thanksgiving of 2022. Ellie let that sit there. She let it sit for a full 10 seconds. 10 seconds is an eternity in a courtroom. Then she said very gently, 3 years ago. You have not eaten a meal in my client's home in 3 years. And yet you have come before this court today, under oath, to testify about her day-to-day cognitive function inside that home. Is that correct, Mrs. Washington?" Brianna did not answer. Ellie said, "No further questions, Your Honor." She sat down next to me. Under the table, she squeezed my hand. The judge called a 1-hour recess for lunch at 12:30. Ellie and I went to a small conference room down the hall. There were 2 chairs and a table. There was a paper bag on the table that Ellie had packed that morning. turkey sandwiches on wheat, 2 bottles of water, and 2 small bags of potato chips. We sat down across from each other and we unwrapped the sandwiches. We did not eat right away. Ellie looked at me across the table. Her face was serious. "Hannah, we're winning the morning. You know that, right? Sinclair is done. Brianna is done. The jury sees it." "I see it too. But sister, I need to tell you something. We have one more piece of evidence, and once we play it, there is no going back. Your son is never going to recover from this." I did not say anything right away. I took a sip of water. I looked at the turkey sandwich on the wax paper in front of me. I thought about my boy, 6 years old, with dirt on his face, sitting at my kitchen table while I cleaned his lip. I thought about David, 8 years in the grave, still fighting for me. I thought about the 300 families in Sweet Auburn whose houses were going to get bulldozed next year if this project went through. I looked up at Ellie. "Sister," I said, "David did not leave that envelope so I could choose comfort over truth. You play the tape." Ellie nodded. She reached into her briefcase and she pulled out a small, clear plastic bag. Inside the bag was a single black USB drive. She set it on the table between us. I reached out and I put my hand over the bag. I held it for a moment. I said very quietly, "David, baby, it's time." I had buried my husband 8 years ago, but that afternoon, in courtroom 7B, he was about to speak again. The courtroom came back to order at 1:30 that afternoon. The air in the room felt different after lunch. The morning had been formal, almost polite, a kind of slow, careful chess match between the lawyers. But the afternoon had the smell of something heavier. The jurors walked back to their seats quieter than they had left. The man in seat 7, an older black gentleman with a pocket square, glanced at me as he sat down and gave me the smallest nod. Not a smile. A nod. The kind of nod that said, "We see you, sister. Go on now." Judge Holloway adjusted her glasses and looked down at the docket. "Miss Brooks, are you ready to present the plaintiff's case?" Ellie stood. "Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Mrs. Rosalind Jefferson." Behind me, I heard a sharp intake of breath. I did not turn around. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw Terrence's head come up. I saw him lean toward Reeves and whisper something. Reeves whispered back. Terrence whispered again, more urgently this time. Reeves shook his head. My son did not know this name. He was about to learn it. Rosalind Jefferson walked down the center aisle of courtroom 7B the way a woman walks down the aisle of a church. Slowly, deliberately, with her chin up and her pocketbook held in front of her with both hands. She was 68 years old. Her hair was the color of clean snow, pulled back into a low bun at the nape of her neck. She wore a simple black dress with a gold cross on a thin chain around her neck. In her right hand, tucked between her fingers and the clasp of her purse, was a small leather Bible. The bailiff swore her in. She placed her hand on the book. She said, "I do," in a voice so steady it seemed to belong to a woman 40 years younger. Ellie approached the stand. "Mrs. Jefferson, can you please state your name and your relationship to the deceased Dr. David Washington? My name is Rosalind Marie Jefferson. I was the wife of Dr. Samuel Everett Jefferson, who passed in the spring of 2021. My husband and David Washington were classmates at Morehouse College, beginning in the fall of 1984. They were roommates during their sophomore year. They stood up in each other's weddings. They were godfathers to each other's children. They were friends for 41 years. Mrs. Jefferson, are you familiar with an entity known as the Washington Legacy Trust?" "I am. Can you tell the court what the Washington Legacy Trust is?" "Yes, ma'am. The Washington Legacy Trust is a community land trust that was formally established on June 3, 2017, by my husband Samuel and Dr. David Washington. Its mission is to preserve Black homeownership in historically Black neighborhoods in the Atlanta metropolitan area, with a particular focus on Sweet Auburn, Cascade Heights, Summerhill, and the West End. And to your knowledge, what is the current value of the trust's holdings?" As of the most recent accounting, which was completed at the end of the last fiscal quarter, the trust holds approximately 240 properties with a combined market value of approximately $42 million. A ripple went through the courtroom. I could feel it behind me. Somebody coughed. Somebody else whispered. Judge Holloway tapped her gavel once, softly, and the room settled. "Mrs. Jefferson, your husband was a founding member of this trust. Did he share the details of the trust's purpose with you?" "He did. My Samuel did not believe in keeping secrets from his wife. Did he ever explain to you why Dr. Washington founded this trust? He did. Can you share that with the court? Rosalind Jefferson sat up a little straighter. She placed her Bible in her lap. She looked directly at the jurors, not at Ellie, not at me, not at the man who had once been my son. My Samuel told me that in the winter of 2016, David attended a family dinner. At that dinner, his son Terrence, who had recently married into a family with significant real estate holdings, made certain remarks. Remarks about elderly black homeowners, about their, in the son's word, sentimental attachments to their property, about how those attachments could be, in the son's word, leveraged. You could have heard a pin drop in that courtroom. David came home from that dinner and sat in his car for 45 minutes. That is what my Samuel told me. Then he came inside, and he did not eat supper, and he did not sleep. The next morning, he drove to my husband's office at Morehouse School of Medicine, and he said, I remember Samuel telling me this exactly, because Samuel told me this story more than once. David said, Samuel, I have spent my life healing black bodies. I need to spend what's left of it protecting black homes, and I need to start with my own. I did not cry. I sat at the plaintiff's table with my hands folded in my lap, and I did not cry, because I was not going to give this courtroom the satisfaction of watching me break. But inside my chest, something old and tired and grieving sat down and rested for the first time in 8 years. My husband had seen it. My husband had known. And my husband, even dying, had built something big enough and beautiful enough to hold our people up when the floor gave way. Ellie's voice went very gentle. Mrs. Jefferson, to your knowledge, were there any individuals specifically excluded from the trust's operations? There were, ma'am. How many? 1. And what was that individual's name? Rosalind Jefferson looked up. She looked across the courtroom. She looked at the man sitting at the defense table in the Tom Ford suit with the blood-colored tie. Terrence Allen Washington, she said. The words fell into the room like stones into still water. Ellie walked back to our table. She picked up a thin folder. She walked to the podium. Your Honor, at this time the plaintiff moves to admit Plaintiff's Exhibit 17, the founding charter of the Washington Legacy Trust, dated June 3, 2017, notarized and witnessed by 3 parties, including a sitting member of the Georgia State Bar. I would direct the court's attention to Article 4, Section 2, subsection C. Judge Holloway opened her copy. She read for a moment. Her eyebrows went up 1/4 inch. Miss Brooks, do you intend to read this subsection into the record? I do, Your Honor. Proceed. Ellie lifted a single sheet of paper. Her voice, when she read, was steady as a church bell. Article 4, Section 2, subsection C. In the event that any individual identified herein as an excluded party, specifically Terrence Allen Washington, son of the founder, shall attempt, directly or indirectly, to diminish, displace, or dispossess any black-owned residential property located within the Trust's designated protection zones, the trustees are hereby authorized and required to deploy the Trust's full legal and financial resources in opposition to said attempt, regardless of familial relation or personal cost to the founder's estate. She lowered the paper. Your Honor, I would now ask the court's permission to play an audio recording made on the afternoon of June 3, 2017, in the law offices of Brooks & Associates, contemporaneous with the signing of this document. Any objection, Mr. Reeves? Reeves stood. Slowly. He looked for the first time all day like a man who was not sure what was about to happen. Your Honor, on what grounds is this audio recording being offered? On the grounds of establishing founder intent and addressing the defense's claim that Mrs. Washington is incapable of understanding her own fiduciary relationship to this trust, Your Honor. I'll allow it. Proceed, Miss Brooks. Ellie walked back to our table. She opened her laptop. She pressed a key. And my husband's voice, 8 years dead, filled the courtroom. It was David. It was my David. His voice was a little thin. By June of 2017, the cancer had already been in him for 6 months, though he had not told me yet. But it was his voice. The voice that had read Goodnight Moon to Terrence when he was 3. The voice that had sung Precious Lord over my mother's casket in 2015. The voice that had whispered, I love you, Hannah, into my ear every single night of our marriage before we went to sleep. The recording was about 2 minutes long. This is David Gerald Washington. Today is June 3rd, 2017. I am of sound mind and I am making this recording willingly, in the presence of my attorney Eleanor Brooks and my business partner Dr. Samuel Jefferson. I want to state, for any future proceeding where this may be needed, the following. I love my son Terrence. I have loved him since the day he was born. I am his father, and I will be his father until the day I die and after. But I have seen something in my son over the past 18 months that grieves me. I have heard him talk about our own people, the people who raised him, the people who sent him to Morehouse with their hard-earned dollars, the people who packed the pews at Mount Zion to watch him graduate. I have heard my son talk about those people like they are a market opportunity, and I fear that the education my wife and I have given him, an education paid for in double shifts and brown bag lunches, is going to be turned against the very community that produced it. So I am making this trust, and I am making this recording. If my son ever tries to use the family name, or family property, or any instrument of family trust, including power of attorney over his mother, to displace black families from their homes in the name of development, this trust activates against him. Fully, without hesitation, without sentiment. I love my son, but I love my people more, and if I am not here to stop him, I need this trust to stop him for me. Hannah, if you are hearing this, baby, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. But you are strong enough. You have always been strong enough. You just have to let yourself be. This is David Washington, June 3rd, 2017. End of recording. The courtroom did not move. Not a jury member, not a spectator, not the court reporter. For a long moment, maybe 10 seconds, maybe more, nobody even breathed. Then from the defense table came a sound I had not heard from my son since he was 12 years old, sitting on the back steps of our house after his granddaddy's funeral. He was crying. He was crying into his hands, hunched over at the defense table, his shoulders shaking. And Jonathan Reeves, the shark, the $4 million lawyer, the man who had spent the morning calling me this sweet lady, Jonathan Reeves sat next to him and did not know where to put his own hands. Brianna got up from the bench behind the defense table. She picked up her purse. She walked out of the courtroom. She did not come back. Behind me, I heard Harold Whitfield, my son's father-in-law, the man who had signed the development agreement, the man who had sat in this courtroom all morning looking like he was attending a quarterly earnings meeting. I heard Harold Whitfield stand up from his seat in the gallery. I heard him walk down the aisle. I heard the heavy oak doors open and close behind him. I found out later that Harold Whitfield was, at that very moment, in the hallway outside courtroom 7B, making a phone call to his personal attorney, instructing him to begin immediate negotiations with the United States Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Georgia regarding voluntary disclosure of related financial irregularities. He did not want to go down with my son. He was right not to. Judge Holloway gave the courtroom about 60 seconds. Then she tapped her gavel, once softly. Miss Brooks, do you have additional witnesses? Ellie looked at me. I looked at her. She knew. I knew. Your Honor, at this time the plaintiff calls Mrs. Hannah Mae Washington to the stand. I stood up. I had not planned to take the stand. In all of our preparation, Ellie had told me that most likely she would not put me on. You don't have to give them a target, Hannah, she had said. We have enough evidence. You don't have to do it. But something had shifted in that room when David's voice came through those speakers. And I knew, the way a woman of a certain age knows these things, that the last word in this story was not going to be David's. It was going to be mine. I walked to the witness stand. I placed my hand on the Bible. The bailiff, the tall man with the graying temples, the kind face, looked at me when he swore me in, and I thought for a moment that he looked like he might cry too. I sat down. I folded my hands in my lap. I faced Jonathan Reeves, who stood up from the defense table slowly, buttoning his jacket, preparing to cross-examine me. He was still going to try. I watched him walk toward the podium, and I thought, all right, sir, come on then. Mrs. Washington. Reeves's voice was still warm, still slow, but there was something underneath it now, something thin and brittle, like a piece of glass that has already been cracked. Yes, Mr. Reeves. Mrs. Washington, you testified— I'm sorry, excuse me, you did not testify, but it was represented by your counsel that you were unaware of the existence of this trust fund until 3 weeks ago. Is that correct? Yes, sir, that is correct. So it is fair to say, is it not, that for approximately 8 years you lacked basic knowledge of your own financial position? Mr. Reeves, my husband built something beautiful and kept it quiet to protect it. I did not know about it. That does not mean I was incapable of knowing. It means I was not told. But if you were not told, Mrs. Washington, how can this court be confident that you are currently capable of overseeing a $42 million community trust? Because my husband chose me to. Reeves smiled a thin smile. With respect, Mrs. Washington, a husband's trust is not a clinical evaluation. No, sir, it is better than one. A laugh came from somewhere in the jury box. It was quick. It was stifled. But it happened. Reeves shifted his weight. Mrs. Washington, isn't it true that you have not filed your own federal tax returns in the past 5 years? No, sir, that is not true. It is not true? No, sir, I filed my own federal tax return 2 weeks ago. I have copies with me in a folder in my counsel's briefcase. I would be pleased to show them to you. That will not be necessary. Are you sure, sir? I also have the last 5 years if you'd like to see those. There was no laughter that time, but the juror in seat 3 put her hand over her mouth. Reeves's neck had started to get a little red above his collar. Mrs. Washington, isn't it true that your son has been supporting you financially in recent years? No, sir. It is not true? No, sir. My son has not paid me $1 in his life. My son has taken $847,000 from me, using a signature he forged on 47 pages of documents while I was in Chicago, holding my newborn granddaughter. That is true. The other thing is not. Reeves paused. He looked down at his notes. He turned a page. He turned another page. I watched him. And then he did the thing that lawyers sometimes do when they have lost the factual argument, and they have decided to try the emotional one instead. It was the last thing he had. Mrs. Washington, he said, isn't it really true that you are a bitter widow who is looking to punish your son for moving on with his life? Isn't this really about the fact that he got married and built his own family? And you can't accept that? I did not answer right away. I looked at Jonathan Reeves. I looked past him, at the jurors. I looked at my son, who was sitting at the defense table with his eyes on the floor and his face wet. And then I spoke. Mr. Reeves, I spent 35 years as an intensive care nurse at Grady Memorial Hospital in this city. I worked the night shift for most of those years. I have held the hands of 417 men and women while they died. I know the exact number because I wrote it down, one line at a time, in a notebook I still keep in my nightstand. Some of those people were rich. Some of them were poor. Some of them were black. Some of them were white. Some of them had families in the waiting room, and some of them came in alone off the street. A few of them were not good people in this life, Mr. Reeves. I am a nurse. I do not get to choose whose hand I hold. You hold the hand that is offered. I will tell you what I learned in 35 years of holding dying people's hands. Not one of them, not one, Mr. Reeves, ever whispered to me that they regretted loving too much. Many of them whispered that they regretted loving the wrong way. My son is sitting in this courtroom today. He is my firstborn child. I carried him in my body for 9 months. I nursed him from my own breast for 13 months after that. I sent him to Morehouse College on double shifts and brown bag lunches. My husband and I sold the car we had owned for 10 years to put him through Harvard Law School. My son did not steal from me because he needed money, Mr. Reeves. My son has more money than I have ever had in my life. My son stole from me because somewhere along the way, between Harvard and the corner office and the Tom Ford suit, he forgot that every good thing he is standing on today was built by a black woman who worked double shifts and sang hymns in the break room to keep herself awake. I am not here to punish my son, Mr. Reeves. If I wanted to punish my son, I could have done that a long time ago, in a quiet way, the way mothers do. I am here because there are 340 families in Sweet Auburn, Georgia who do not know my name, who do not know my husband's name, who do not know that a black doctor and a black nurse who lived in a 3-bedroom house on Cascade Road spent 10 years of their life quietly building something to keep a roof over the heads of people they would never meet. Those families were going to lose their homes next year, Mr. Reeves. Those families were going to get letters in the mail from companies they had never heard of, offering them 50 cents on the dollar for houses that have been in their families for 4 generations. Those families were going to get pushed out of Atlanta the way our people have been pushed out of Atlanta since before I was born. My husband built something to stop that. He built it with his own hands and his own money and his own dying breath. And he trusted me, a black woman from Macon, Georgia, the daughter of a third-grade school teacher and a Baptist preacher. He trusted me to protect it after he was gone. If my husband's name has to be the one that protects those families, Mr. Reeves, then let it be my husband's name. I am not a bitter widow, sir. I am a grateful one, and I will stand on this stand today, and I will stand in a courtroom next week, and I will stand in front of the United States Congress if I have to, because my husband trusted me to stand. And that, sir, is what I am doing. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the air moving through the vents. Judge Holloway, 65 years old, the most senior black woman on the federal bench in the Northern District of Georgia, took her glasses off. She folded them slowly and set them on the desk in front of her. She did not say anything for a long time. Then she said very softly, "Mr. Reeves, do you have any further questions for this witness?" Jonathan Reeves stood at the podium with both hands flat against the wood. He looked down at his notes. He looked up at me. He opened his mouth. He closed it. "No, Your Honor, the defense has no further questions. The witness may step down." I stepped down. I did not look at my son as I walked back to the plaintiff's table. I did not need to. The jury went out at 3:10 in the afternoon. Judge Holloway called a recess. Ellie and I walked out into the hallway. Ellie hugged me. She did not say anything. Neither did I. Some moments don't need words. We just stood there in the hallway outside courtroom 7B, two black women who had been friends for 30 years, and we held on to each other. The jury came back at 6:07, 3 hours and 57 minutes. Ellie whispered to me as the jurors filed in, "Hannah Mae, in my experience, fast verdicts are almost always for the plaintiff. Just breathe, sister." I breathed. The foreperson was the black woman in seat 3, the one in the burgundy blazer who had stopped taking notes during Reeves's opening statement. She stood up. She was holding a piece of paper. Her hand was steady. Judge Holloway said, "Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." "Please publish your findings." The foreperson unfolded the paper. Her voice filled the room. "On the matter of the defendant's petition for guardianship of Hannah Mae Washington, we find in favor of the plaintiff. The petition is denied." A soft sound went through the gallery. Ellie squeezed my hand under the table. "On the matter of financial fraud and misappropriation of funds through the falsification of a power of attorney instrument, we find the defendant, Terrence Washington, liable in the full amount of the disputed loan, $847,000, plus accrued interest, plus punitive damages." Another sound, louder this time. "On the matter of elder financial abuse under the Georgia Elder Abuse Statute, we find the defendant guilty as charged, and we refer this matter to the United States Attorney for further criminal proceedings." I closed my eyes. "On the matter of the Peachtree Legacy Development Project and its associated land acquisition instruments, we find the contracts void, unenforceable, and hereby enjoin all further action pending federal review." Ellie put her arm around my shoulders. "On the matter of the license to practice law held by Terrence Washington, we refer this matter to the State Bar of Georgia with a recommendation for immediate suspension pending review." Judge Holloway nodded once. She thanked the jury. She banged her gavel. She stood up, her black robe swinging, and she walked out of the courtroom. I did not cry. I did not smile. I bowed my head just a little, and I whispered, so quietly that I don't think even Ellie heard me, "Thank you, David." They put handcuffs on my son in the courtroom. The bailiff, the kind-faced man with the graying temples, did it as gently as I think it is possible for a man to put handcuffs on another man. Terrence did not resist. He stood up. He held out his hands. The bailiff did what the law required him to do, and as they walked him past the plaintiff's table, past me, past his mother, my son stopped. The bailiff stopped with him. Terrence turned his head. He looked at me for the first time all day, and he said very quietly, "Mama, Daddy told me too, years ago. I didn't listen." The bailiff waited. I waited. I did not answer him. I do not know even now if I should have said something, if I should have told him I loved him, if I should have told him I forgave him, if I should have said nothing, which is what I did. All I know is that my son, 38 years old, in a Tom Ford suit with steel cuffs around his wrists, looked at me across a Georgia courtroom, and he told me something I had not known until that very moment. David had seen it. David had warned him. And my boy had chosen this anyway, with his eyes open. The bailiff walked him out. I sat in the Honda Civic in the courthouse parking garage for a very long time. I did not turn the engine on. I just sat there, in the concrete gray of that garage, with my purse on my lap and my mother's pearls around my neck. And I looked at the steering wheel. I thought about David, sitting in our driveway in the winter of 2016, for 45 minutes, because he had just heard something come out of his son's mouth that broke him. I thought about my mama standing at her kitchen sink in 1979, humming Blessed Assurance while she washed the dishes. I thought about 417 strangers, and I cried. Not a pretty cry, not a dignified cry. The kind of cry that a woman does alone in a car because there is no other safe place left in the world to do it. 15 minutes, maybe 20. My shoulders shook. My mother's pearls bounced against my collarbone. I let it come. When I was finished, I wiped my face with a tissue from the glove box. I picked up my phone. I called my daughter. Simone answered on this first ring. She must have been holding her phone. "Mama?" "Baby, it's over." She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "I'm flying home tonight, Mama. I'll be there by morning. I'm making you a pie." I laughed then. I actually laughed. A tired, wet, real laugh. "No, baby," I said. "You come on home. But the pie is mine to make. That recipe is mine to keep." "Yes, ma'am," my daughter said. "Yes, ma'am, it is." 6 months have passed since that day in courtroom 7B. It is April now. The azaleas along my front walk are coming in again. The magnolia tree in the front yard has new buds on every branch. My son is serving 7 years in a federal facility in Alabama. I have not gone to see him yet. I am not sure when I will. I sent him a Bible at Christmas, a new one, soft leather, his name embossed in gold on the front cover, and I marked Psalm 51 for him with a yellow ribbon. I hope he reads it. I do not know if he has. Brianna filed for divorce in January. I heard from Sister Patrice, who heard from somebody at the beauty shop, that Brianna has moved back to Buckhead and is living with her mother. I wish her no harm. I wish her no good either. I wish her nothing. That is, I have learned, the hardest wish to carry for somebody who has wronged you, and also the most honest one. Harold Whitfield pleaded guilty to 3 counts of wire fraud in February. He will not see the inside of a prison. Men like Harold Whitfield rarely do. But he paid a fine of $4 million and surrendered his real estate broker's license. And Whitfield Development Corporation was dissolved by court order. The Peachtree Legacy Project was formally canceled on February the 27th. 340 black families in Sweet Auburn are still sleeping in the beds they slept in before I ever heard the word gentrification. In March, I established the David Washington Community Foundation with $10 million drawn from the Legacy Trust. Ellie Brooks serves as our chief legal counsel. Rosalind Jefferson is my co-chair. My daughter Simone moved home from Chicago with my son-in-law and my granddaughter Ava Ruth, and Simone is now our executive director. We provide free legal aid to elderly black homeowners across the state of Georgia who are being pressured, defrauded, or displaced from their property. We have handled 211 cases in the first 3 months. We have not lost one yet. I still live in the house on Cascade Road. I still drive the Honda Civic. I still go to church on Sundays and sit in the 3rd pew on the left. I still make a sweet potato pie every Sunday morning on my great-grandmother's recipe on a yellow index card with butter stains and cinnamon smudges from 113 years of use. And every Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock sharp, my phone rings. It is my daughter. She is home. I was sitting on my front porch yesterday evening. It was a Sunday. The sun was coming down behind the houses across the street, and the sky was that soft Atlanta pink that only happens for about 20 minutes in April. I had a glass of sweet tea on the little table next to my rocking chair and a slice of pie on a plate in my lap, and I was just sitting. Across the street, a little boy came running out of his grandmother's house. He could not have been more than 7 or 8 years old. Dark skin, big eyes, a gap between his 2 front teeth. He saw me on the porch. He stopped on the sidewalk. He waved. "Hi, Miss Hannah." I waved back. "Hey, baby." He ran off down the street, his arms out like airplane wings. Somewhere behind him, his grandmother called his name from the front door. He did not stop running. I sat on my porch in the pink April light, and I thought about my David. I thought about what he had told that recording back in 2017, before he knew he was dying, but when he already knew something was coming. I love my son, but I love my people more. And I thought, For the first time since I had heard those words come through the courtroom speakers, I thought that maybe David had gotten it only half right, because my people are my son, and my people are also that little boy across the street, and his grandmother, and the 340 families in Sweet Auburn, and the woman in Macon who cleaned white folks' houses for 60 years to send her daughter to Spelman, and the 417 strangers whose hands I held while they left this world. My people are every single one of them, and what my David taught me, what he spent the last years of his life teaching me, even from the grave, is that loving your people is not the opposite of loving your son. Loving your people is loving your son. It is loving him enough to tell him the truth. It is loving him enough to stand in a courtroom and say no. It is loving him enough to let him face what he has earned, so that one day, maybe, if he is blessed and if he listens and if the Lord is merciful, one day he might find his way home.